Donald Garfield Youngblood was born on April 7, 1954, in Bakersfield, California. At first glance, he might seem like just another name in bodybuilding history. But the truth is, his journey doesn't follow the sport's usual script at all. Don didn't start out as a teenager chasing fame, and he didn't drop everything to live only for the gym. He built a solid life first, and only then decided to push his physical limits to the edge. Standing 5 feet 9 inches, 1.75 meters, Youngblood stepped on stage at an impressive 245 pounds, about 111 kilograms, in full contest shape. In the off-season, he went up to around 295 pounds, roughly 134 kilograms. His physique was compact, incredibly dense, with that gritty, grainy look people often associate with bodybuilding's most hardcore era. He wasn't just big. He looked like he'd been carved out of stone. The nickname The Beast wasn't random. In the Masters division, for athletes over 40, Don stood out for his combination of sheer muscle mass, maturity, and deep conditioning. His stage presence radiated power. He was the kind of competitor who grabbed your attention before the comparisons even started. And what made it even more impressive? He hadn't been a bodybuilder since his teenage years. Don was actually a transportation industry entrepreneur. Long before he won any titles, he was running a company with over 100 trucks hauling food across the country. His days were split between business decisions and brutally intense training sessions. Boardroom by day, barbell by night. To understand that mindset, you have to go further back. Don was the youngest of 9 siblings, raised in a hard-working family. From an early age, he learned that discipline isn't optional, it's required. At Foothill High School, he played football and baseball, building competitiveness and resilience. But more importantly, he built character. While many athletes start young chasing trophies, Don took a different path. He built his career, his family, and financial stability first. Bodybuilding only became serious for him at 33. And here's the part that changes everything. He started when most people are thinking about slowing down. He wasn't a young prodigy. He was a late challenger. Long before putting on posing trunks and stepping onto the Olympia stage, Don Youngblood had already achieved something many people spend a lifetime chasing: financial security and respect in the business world. He didn't get into bodybuilding for money or fame. When he decided to compete, he was already successful, and that completely reshapes how we see his story. It all started in a simple way. Don worked as a driver for Southern Pacific Railroad, learning firsthand how freight transportation really worked. He didn't inherit a company. He didn't get shortcuts. He drove, he watched, he learned. That's where he began to understand logistics, deadlines, responsibility, and above all, discipline. The same discipline he would later bring into his training. With courage and vision, he secured a $6,000 loan to buy his first Peterbilt truck. By today's standards, that's roughly the price of a used car, but back then, it was everything. He drove during the day and worked on the truck at night, doing maintenance himself. It was literally sweat and grease. No glamour, just work. And that's how he built something bigger, one truck at a time. After moving to Alma, Arkansas, he founded SDS Transportation Services. What began with a single vehicle grew into a fleet of more than 100 trucks and trailers. The company transported frozen food nationwide, serving major corporations like Walmart, Tyson Foods, and Cargill. That's not small business. That's a logistics empire. Now think about that for a second. He already had money, infrastructure, a stable family life. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. So why step into an expensive, exhausting, brutally competitive sport? Maybe because for Don, winning wasn't about stacking trucks or landing million-dollar contracts. It was about testing his own limits. Most professional bodybuilders start in their teens. By 20, many are already competing at a high level. Don did the opposite. He began training seriously at 33. He wasn't the next young phenom. He was a man choosing to reinvent himself. In the beginning, he trained in his own garage. No fancy facilities. No sponsors. Just iron plates, sweat, and discipline. While other athletes had coaches, prep teams, and financial backing from early on, Don had one thing: determination. He trained because he wanted to find out exactly what he was capable of. At that point, his biggest inspiration was the dominant name in the Masters division, Vince Taylor. Don would cut photos out of magazines, study that incredible physique, and use it as fuel. What he couldn't have imagined was that just a few years later, he'd be standing on the same stage, facing the very man he looked up to. Think about the boldness of that for a second. Over time, he started training at the legendary Gold's Gym. That's where things shifted. What had started as something personal, almost private, began turning into something bigger. He realized he wasn't just strong for his age. He was competitive. His physique was evolving quickly. The muscle density stood out, and his confidence kept growing. Going pro in bodybuilding after your 30s is incredibly rare. Your body doesn't respond the same way it does at 20. Recovery changes. Hormones shift. Metabolism slows down. But Don decided to test those limits anyway. He wasn't trying to turn back the clock. He was trying to rewrite it. After years of training almost quietly, balancing business decisions with intense workouts, the moment of truth finally came. In 1994, at 40 years old, Don stepped on stage for the first time. This wasn't just a physical test. It was a courage test. He competed at the NPC Arkansas State Masters and won decisively. First show, first title, and a clear message. He wasn't there to participate. He was there to win. That victory wasn't just symbolic. It confirmed what he had already started to see in the mirror. His physique was truly competitive. Size, density, and mature muscle development immediately caught attention. For someone who had started at 33, winning at 40 was already unusual. But Don didn't want to be the best in his state. He wanted something bigger. In 1995, he came back even sharper. He competed again at the NPC Arkansas State and took the overall title. Then he stepped onto the national stage at the NPC Masters Nationals, winning the heavyweight class and the overall. That's when it became clear he wasn't just a local standout. He could compete nationally. Here's the interesting part. At that time, the Masters Nationals didn't automatically award an IFBB Pro card. So even after winning, he didn't immediately turn pro. For many athletes, that could have been frustrating. But Don did what he always did. He went back home. He kept working. And he kept training. After his 1995 Masters Nationals win, people expected him to hit the gas and chase the pro ranks immediately. Instead, he stepped away from competition for nearly 3 years. No spotlight. No rush. He chose silence. He chose to build his foundation even stronger outside the stage. During that time, his company kept growing. SDS Transportation was expanding, major contracts were being secured, and responsibility increased. Don understood something most athletes don't think about early on. Stability comes before ambition. He didn't want to gamble on bodybuilding. He wanted to compete with structure, security, and maturity. And even though he was away from the stage, he never stopped training. In fact, his physique kept improving. More muscle mass, greater density, and mentally, he became even stronger. That break wasn't time off. It was quiet preparation. Then, in 1998, after rule changes allowed it, he officially received his IFBB Pro card. He wasn't just a talented amateur anymore. He was a professional with business experience, emotional maturity, and an even more imposing physique. He didn't come back in a hurry. He came back ready. And then, in 2001, the moment finally arrived. After years building his body away from the bright lights, Don stepped onto one of the biggest stages in the Masters division, the Masters Olympia. And it felt almost scripted. Standing across from him wasn't just another competitor. It was the man who had inspired him from the beginning, Vince Taylor. Vince was already a legend. He had dominated the Masters Olympia for years and was seen as nearly untouchable. For many, the outcome seemed obvious before prejudging even began. But once the comparison started, something unexpected happened. Don got the first call out. He stood side by side with the reigning champion. And suddenly, this wasn't a tribute story anymore. It was a real fight. His physique was undeniable. Dense, dry, full, and extremely competitive. He wasn't up there to fill space. He was going head-to-head. The crowd felt it. The judges felt it. And suddenly, the businessman who started training at 33 was threatening the reign of the biggest name in the division. The final result was razor close. Don lost by just 2 points. 2 points separated the challenger from the top of the world. For most athletes, that kind of loss could be crushing. But Don responded differently. He publicly acknowledged his main weakness, posing. The muscle was there. The presentation needed work. And it did improve. In Lynchburg, Virginia, Masters Olympia 2002. The stage was set, the lights were blazing, and all eyes were still on one name: Vince Taylor. He had dominated the Masters Olympia for 5 straight years. He was the undisputed king of the division. For many fans, it felt like just another routine title defense. But Don had other plans. This time, he didn't step on stage just competitive. He stepped on stage transformed. He was leaner, denser, and even fuller than the year before. The muscle maturity was obvious. Every pose revealed deep cuts and that grainy texture very few athletes can display, especially at 48 years old. He didn't look like a challenger anymore. He looked ready to take the throne. The truth is, Don wasn't the favorite. There was no massive hype campaign behind him, no over-the-top promotion. He came in almost like an underdog. But as the comparisons went on, it became clear something different was happening. He wasn't just keeping up with Vince, he was pushing him. And this time, his posing, last year's weakness, was sharp and confident. When the final results were announced, the unexpected happened. Don defeated Vince Taylor and captured his first and only Masters Olympia title. The 5-time defending champion placed second. The businessman who started late in the sport was now the best in the world in his division. One of the biggest upsets in Masters history had just taken place. He won at 48 years old. Think about that. How many people at 48 are slowing down? Don was peaking. For many athletes, winning the Masters Olympia would have been enough. But for Don, it wasn't the finish line, it was a doorway. With the 2002 victory, he earned the right to compete in the main division of the most prestigious event in bodybuilding, the Mr. Olympia Open. The next challenge would be against the biggest names on the planet, athletes in their physical prime. That same year, he stepped on the Mr. Olympia stage. There was no age division, no special category, just a direct battle with the best professionals in the world. For a man who began serious training at 33, simply being there was extraordinary. He finished in 25th place. On paper, that might seem modest, but context changes everything. He wasn't a young prospect groomed since his teens for that moment. He was a businessman, a family man, a Masters champion, and a late arrival to the pro elite. Walking onto that stage meant more than a number next to his name. It meant he had broken through every possible barrier: age, expectations, the dominance of a historic champion, and even the logic of the sport itself. He didn't win the Open, but he fulfilled the dream of standing among the very best. And that raises the big question: how did Don manage to grow so dramatically in such a relatively short time? Because if the stage showed the result, the training revealed the truth. Behind that dense, dry physique was a method built on intensity, discipline, and relentless repetition. Under the guidance of renowned coach Chad Nichols, he developed a routine that didn't rely on gimmicks or wild theories. It relied on hard work, plain and simple. Don preferred free weights and heavy loads. He believed raw iron built real muscle. Supersets, drop sets, and high-volume sessions were regular parts of his prep. He wasn't locked into extreme philosophies or revolutionary systems. He used machines, isolation movements, and compound lifts, but always with one clear objective: maximum intensity. His contest prep typically started 10 to 13 weeks before a show. That's about 2.5 to 3 months of calculated, strategic work where every detail mattered. Training load, volume, and recovery were carefully adjusted to bring out that dry, grainy look that became his trademark. Cardio was also a key part of the plan. During more intense phases, he'd do 2 sessions a day, 45 minutes in the morning and 30 minutes at night. Even on lighter days, he kept at least 15 minutes daily during prep. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't trendy. It was consistent, and consistency was his real secret weapon. If training built the size, diet revealed the definition. Don understood there's no stage-ready physique without absolute control over nutrition. His meal plan was structured and closely monitored by Chad Nichols. The foundation was simple and effective: whole foods, high-quality protein, controlled carbohydrates, and strategic adjustments depending on the phase of prep. No magic tricks. No flashy, overcomplicated protocols made for headlines. What really mattered was consistency. Eating right every single day, even when running a transportation company demanded serious mental and physical energy. On top of that, he used supplements to fill in the gaps. Effervescent creatine, vitamins, and minerals were part of his stack. The goal was simple: improve recovery, support strength, and enhance performance. without turning supplementation into a spectacle. For Don, supplements were tools, not marketing gimmicks. When it came to steroids or other performance-enhancing drugs, Don stayed reserved. He never publicly confirmed or denied anything. He referred to PEDs as part of the sport, but he avoided controversy and didn't fuel heated debates. He preferred to let his physique speak for itself. Behind the massive frame and the beast persona was a family man. Don was married to Sue, his high school sweetheart. Their story started young and stretched across decades of hard work, state moves, business growth, and personal challenges. Before he was a champion, he was a husband and a father. They had 4 children, but life dealt a devastating blow. His daughter Christy passed away at just 11 years old due to a brain aneurysm. It was sudden, unexpected, and deeply painful. Don described it as the lowest point of his life. No trophy, no business deal, no amount of money could ever balance that loss. And this is where his story becomes even deeper. Training stopped being just physical development. It became emotional refuge. Lifting weights turned into a way to process grief, to organize his thoughts, to channel pain into discipline. The iron became therapy. Even after that tragedy, he continued providing for his family, running his company, and staying focused on competition. He became a grandfather, experienced joy with his grandkids, and never abandoned his sense of responsibility. His strength wasn't just in his muscles, it was in his resilience. When you look at photos of Don on stage, you see muscle density, intense eyes, a dominant posture. But away from the lights, he was nothing like the intimidating image his physique projected. Don was known as humble, reserved, and extremely respectful. He didn't chase unnecessary attention. He let his work speak. Despite being a millionaire businessman with a fleet of over 100 trucks, he didn't show off. He didn't live like a celebrity. He worked full days handling logistics, contracts, and major decisions. Then, after exhausting days, he trained. Not because of a sponsor obligation, not because of hype, but because he was personally obsessed with progress. He didn't like the arrogance that sometimes floats around bodybuilding. He didn't relate to athletes who looked down on others. For Don, respect came before rivalry. Competing mattered, but character mattered more. That quiet mindset only deepened the admiration people had for him behind the scenes. But not every chapter has a happy ending. On May 8, 2005, the bodybuilding world received news no one expected. Don Youngblood passed away suddenly at 51 years old in his home in Alma, Arkansas. The cause was a massive heart attack. Just 3 years earlier, he had been on top of the Masters division. Now, his journey was abruptly cut short. His death shocked family, friends, and fans. He was still active, still training, still respected in the sport. There was no long farewell, no gradual decline announced publicly. It was sudden, and that made the impact even heavier. As often happens in professional bodybuilding, speculation followed. Some suggested the extreme physical stress of the sport may have played a role. Others pointed out that elite athletes live under intense pressure for years. However, there was no definitive official medical confirmation directly linking his passing to competition or performance-enhancing substances. What remained wasn't certainty. It was absence. Don's story inevitably forces a bigger conversation about the limits of the human body. Bodybuilding demands extreme levels of dedication, preparation, and intensity. But how far can someone really push it? Is there an invisible price that only becomes clear too late? Those questions have followed the sport for decades, and they're not easy to answer. Don Youngblood went down in history as a true late bloomer. In a sport where most athletes peak in their 20s or early 30s, he proved that reaching the top after 40 is still possible. His victory wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. He represented everyone who started late, everyone who was told it was too late, and chose to try anyway. When he won the Masters Olympia in 2002, he didn't just lift a trophy. He revitalized the division. The Masters category, already respected, gained a new narrative. The businessman who began at 33 and dethroned a dominant champion. His triumph ended the reign of Vince Taylor and proved that even established dynasties can fall when they meet someone determined enough. From that point on, many athletes over 40 started looking at the stage differently. It wasn't just a veterans division anymore. It became a space of serious competitiveness, a place where powerful stories could be written. Don became a reference point. proof that maturity can be an advantage, not a limitation. Today, some argue that the Masters Olympia doesn't carry the same prestige it once did. The landscape has changed, new divisions have multiplied, and the cultural impact isn't quite the same. And maybe that's exactly why Don's win stands out even more. He won when the title carried real weight, real rivalry, and global recognition. His legacy isn't just in the results. It's in the mindset he left behind. The belief that it's never too late to compete at a high level. That discipline and courage can rewrite any timeline age tries to impose on you. And maybe that's the final question his story leaves us with. If you truly knew you could still reach the top, would you have the courage to start today?